From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. How do you deal with picky eaters in the family? How do you make time to cook nutrient-dense foods? What are the secret tools of the trade that make meal prep easier? This is episode 453, and we've gathered a panel of experts to address these questions and more. As a matter of fact, we recorded this panel in front of a live audience at the Wise Traditions Conference in Kansas City this past October. The panelists include Sally Fallon Morell, the founder and president of the Weston A. Price Foundation, Maureen Diaz of God's Good Table, Hilary Boynton of School of Lunch, and Christine Muldoon of Nourish the Littles. Today, they each offer sage advice on how to build a Wise Traditions home. We cover everything from how to get kids involved in the meal prep process, how to handle and identify food sensitivities or allergies, and how to go about incorporating more nutrient-dense foods on a regular basis on the table. Each panelist offers insight on the systems they use for cooking and meal planning, and some confess that they have no system at all. But regardless, we learn a little something from each one. Oh, and collectively, the panelists have 21 children, so I would say they know a thing or two about nourishing them well. Before we get into the conversation, the Weston A. Price Foundation has a project called Nourishing Our Children, which launched in 2005 with a focus on timeless principles for supporting learning, behavior, and health through optimal nutrition. Nourishing Our Children has an active online group for parents, would-be parents, grandparents, and adults interested in children's health. If you are looking for support on how to nourish your children and yourself, join the Facebook group Nourish Children 2.0, and you'll also have complimentary access to the Nourish 2.0 group focused on adults for one donation of only $5 for the calendar year. The moderators ensure that no question goes unanswered, so go to nourishingourchildren.org/groups. Again, that's nourishingourchildren.org/groups to learn how to join. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast. We are recording this panel live in front of an audience here at the Kansas City Wise Traditions Conference 2023. And it is comprised of these beautiful people, Sally Fallon Morell, Hilary Boynton, Christine Muldoon, and Maureen Diaz. Please give them a hand. There is a lot of collective wisdom in this room and on this stage. These women have been in the trenches in their own families, and they know what works. So we're happy to share with you today how to build a Wise Traditions home. And the questions that I have here are comprised of questions that the panelists themselves gave me when I asked them, what are the questions that are most frequently posed to you by young moms or young dads who are trying to figure it out and nourish their families well? So here's the first question. I'm going to pose it to Christine and Maureen. Actually, it's very simple. How do you do it? How do you feed your families ancestrally nutrient-dense foods when they're surrounded by Skittles and Takis? Christine, you go first.
Hello? Perfect. Okay. So one of the things that I talk about a lot with my clients is something called food family values. And this is basically a conversation that you have with your family, no matter how young they are, and you have it with your spouse, and you have it with your extended family members, and you discuss what are your food family values. And you can even actually make a list of what your food family values are, and that can be the foods that you eat, that can be the foods that you avoid, that can be your hard no's, whatever your hard no's are, and each family is going to have a different hard no. So that's one of the ways that I do it. I also really believe in holding boundaries. We live in a society where we're inundated, like Hilda said, and sometimes as parents, we have to do the hard thing and hold boundaries and tell our kids, you know what? I know that food looks maybe it looks good or your friends are eating it, but this is not a food that nourishes our body and we're actually not going to eat it. I can make you an alternative. And then the other is making foods that your kids love. This is so important, and I think probably a lot of us are going to say this over and over again, but it's important to make the foods that your kids and your spouse love to eat, because that's how you bring them back to the table over and over again.
And building on that, I have two things. One is we do have a hard and fast no. And as your children become older, and right now our children are remaining in the home are 16, 19, and 22. And occasionally they bring something into the house, in particular when I'm not home. And I come home and I find it, and they understand it's going in the trash. But there is always a replacement. So, for instance, my son works as a mechanic, and he likes to have sandwiches for lunch every day. I came home once this summer, and there was a Hellmann's mayonnaise. It went directly into the trash, and I talked to him about it later, and I said, I always make sure there's mayonnaise for you before I leave, but I also leave an alternative, a compromise in the cabinet just in case we're out. So I have hard and fast rules. They understand that, but they also understand why. I know that you do the same. They understand why. We work hard to make sure that you children grow up with strong and healthy bodies so that you can go into the world and maintain good health. So this is why. But we also have just a few occasional compromises that are not the best, but not horrible, so that occasionally they can have a treat. And the other part of that is that also we do things together. So from the time the kids are little, I have them baking cookies, making bread, making stock, and things like that so that they feel a part of it and then they want to have it. But the other big thing, which is real short and simple, is we keep it simple. I have always kept our meals and our plans simple. Occasionally we splurge and I spend 2 days in the kitchen, like for Thanksgiving or Christmas, and we do big things. But almost every day our meal plans are very, very simple.
Beautiful. Thank you, Maureen. Sally and Hilary, tell us where to start. What tips would you give for a family that's just getting started on this journey of feeding their family ancestrally? Sally, you go first.
Well, as I always say, the place you start is a salad dressing. So if you're new to this, haven't cooked before, learn to make salad dressing using real good quality olive oil, mustard and vinegar. It takes a minute to make salad dressing. You can actually make some in advance and put it in the fridge. And this is your first step to becoming a great cook. And there's so much benefit to doing this. This one little thing, make your own salad dressing, because those bottled dressings have some of the worst ingredients that you can find anywhere. The second thing I would recommend, I call it the 2 chickens. So when I was feeding a very large family, every week I bought 2 chickens, and I came home and they went immediately into the pot, okay, with some good water, a couple of onions, bay leaves, and peppercorns. That was it. And vinegar, little vinegar. And I gently cooked the chickens until they were really tender. And then you have your meat for the weekend. You have your meat for tacos. You have your meat for enchiladas. You have your meat for chicken salad. You have your meat for curry, okay? And you have broth. And that was, in the beginning, that was the only broth I made, that with the 2 chickens. And then you have soup or your mug of broth or whatever. So that's another way to start. And the last thing I would say is get an ice cream maker and learn to make ice cream with cream, egg yolks, vanilla, and maple syrup. The 4 ingredients. It's absolutely delicious. It takes a minute to put it together. And the new ice cream makers, the best ones are the ones that you don't even keep in the freezer. You know what I mean? They're quite heavy. They sit on the counter and you just pour that mix in there, and 20 minutes later you have ice cream. And so this is sending a message that this is not a diet of deprivation, that it's delicious. The ice cream you don't have to eat in the meals is going to be in the freezer, and anytime they want to raid the freezer for that ice cream is just fine, okay, because it's so nutritious. So those would be the 3 things that I would say to start with: the salad dressing, the 2 chickens in the pot, and the homemade ice cream.
Sounds delicious. All right, Hilary.
Okay, so I was thinking about how I started, and I want to just say you guys have all started. I think the number one thing that helped me start was finding the foundation. I'm so grateful to have found a local chapter leader by accident. Actually, I was trying to change the school lunches, 15 years ago, before my kids were really even in school. And ironically, the woman who decided to help me was a chapter leader who instantly changed my life. So Find one person who can walk this walk with you, someone to hold your hand, someone to let you know that you're not crazy. Well, you may be, but you're part of the good crazies, we call ourselves. And that one meeting led to me finding raw milk, which ultimately healed my son of eczema. And then Sally came to speak at a local conference where the first thing she said was, "Salads are killing America." And I was just like, what? Now we can't even eat salad? And then at the end of it, of course, she said it's the dressings. So take your baby steps, right? Find your local egg farmer. Find a good chicken and roast a chicken. Make a bone broth. I remember the first conference I came to, blogging was very brand new, and there were these bloggers that I had found on the internet, and they were like celebrities, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're here, and now are great friends of mine. And so reach out to somebody on Instagram or social media that inspires you. We're all super accessible and have been where you may be right now, feeling alone and overwhelmed and don't know where to start. But the reason that we're all here is because we're so passionate about this mission and this message and getting people back to what we know to be true and good and how to nourish ourselves. So don't be afraid to jump into the work and just be gentle with yourself and do one thing at a time and remember that it's a process.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. It's so encouraging to remember you've already started, so that's a great word. And it's easy to think, okay, I've started in my mind here at the conference, but once we get home and all the demands start coming into our lives, how do we make the time? How do we find the rhythms to feed our families ancestrally? Maureen, why don't you take this one first?
Well, really the biggest key in my household is to be prepared. Just as Sally mentioned, making stock with 2 chickens and you have lots of options. I do prep work about once a week. I make mirepoix. I add garlic, so it's not pure mirepoix. But I use my food processor to get things.
Mire what?
Mirepoix?
Do you want to know what that is?
Okay, I'm sorry. It's a base for creating just about anything you would want to make. It is 2 parts onion, 1 part carrot, 1 part celery. And you chop it up, dice it up. I saute it gently in ghee, and I make at least 1 quart at a time, and I just stick it in a jar in the refrigerator. And then every time I'm making a soup or a saute, all I have to do is go and I scoop it out. I do the same thing with fresh grated ginger and garlic and turmeric and freshly grated black pepper, again in ghee. I just saute it lightly in ghee. I stick it in the refrigerator. When I want to do something Asian or I give some broth to my husband, those anti-inflammatory herbs not only are very flavorful, but very good for him and for us. So I do whatever I can do ahead of time. Something that you're going to be doing throughout the week to make any kind of food, do ahead. Do it once a week and just stick it in the refrigerator. And that, for me, has been a real lifesaver. And the other thing that goes right with that is just to make everything in big batches. So
excellent. Christine?
So a very, very dear friend of mine once told me that meal schedules would save my life, and she was right. Meal schedules save my life, and I'm a huge advocate of them, especially if you have very young children, because young children are extremely visual, and they really can rest in knowing what is predictable and consistent and what's coming. And so if you have the ability to create a meal schedule, it can be for breakfast, it can be for lunch, it can be for dinner. But when your kids come down that morning, they're not asking you, hey, what's for breakfast? And you're scrambling and trying to figure it out. So having a consistent set meal schedule, and you can change it with the seasons, which is what I do. So in the fall and winter, we switch over to consuming broths in the morning. In the summertime, we're doing liver tonics, which is tomato juice with raw liver grated into it for breakfast one day. So as the seasons change, I will change my meal schedules. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about is prioritizing nutrient density and making it simple. So like Maureen talked about making big batches of food. Something else that I like to do is make big batches of certain foods that I know are super nutrient dense. For example, pate. I know that my kids can just pull out a jar of pate anytime they're hungry, and they'll just eat from it if they need something. Another example of that would be like bone marrow. You could roast bone marrow ahead of time and then save it in a Tupperware and have it in the fridge and then add it. You can use it to cook your eggs. You can add it to your soups, anything like that. Those are two things that I do to help with saving time.
Yeah, I think that's really important because if you're feeling rushed, you're likely to just compromise some of those food values you were talking about. It's like, oh, well, I'm tired, I'm busy, let's just stop and get pizza. I mean, I don't know if you all are into that, but sometimes you feel like you can't help it. But if you plan ahead, then that can change everything. So Sally, can you tell us, how do we incorporate more of the nutrient-dense foods, avoiding that kind of rush to get things just on the plate, whatever it is? How do we get the best foods on that plate for our children?
Well, I would agree that it's just good to have things in the fridge, and pate is a great one. Cheese, of course, is a wonderful food, a wonderful snack food, a wonderful travel food. Crispy nuts were a big standby for us. And don't forget, butter is nutrient-dense superfood, especially if it's grass-fed butter. So if you're always using butter, they're always getting that. And then raw milk, of course. And raw milk is like your insurance policy. You know they're going to eat stuff they shouldn't be eating outside the house, and there's going to be slip-ups, but the raw milk is giving them really good, thorough, complete nourishment every day.
Beautiful. Hilary, what foods have been your go-to over the years?
Oh gosh. Well, I was going to say, just to comment on the other question, that I'm not a big planner. And so for those of you who look at all the bloggers with meal plans and you think it's such a great idea and then you just can't manage to do that, I'm with you. But what I have done is I have eliminated any bad choices from the house. So if you can clear out the bad stuff and stock yourself with the best ingredients you can, then the choices are only good, right? So you're kind of the gatekeeper of what the options are. And then, I always say, I quote my friend who's a French elder who told me to remember that simplicity is gourmet. So keep it simple. When you open your fridge, there's many times when I am frazzled and there's a lot going on and I haven't thought about what we're having for dinner and it's 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. And I can open my fridge and I have a good protein, some vegetables, the good fats, I have my sourdough bread. I can always throw together a nutrient-dense meal. And sometimes when my kids were little, it was like scrambled eggs with some avocado and a slice of tomato. It was very simple, but I knew it was real food and it was the best we could do. And also, if you can't make everything, which we often can't do, we want to do it all at once, find your local fermenter. Buy the ferments. Don't get overwhelmed trying to do it all. There's a good bakery where you can get beautiful sourdough bread. You don't have to make everything from scratch like Bill Schindler did for a year. So just be gentle with yourself, but stock yourself with the good stuff. And we rely on, like Sally said, raw milk. I think my youngest son perhaps has lived off of raw milk maybe in the last year, going to high school and not wanting to eat the school lunches, not wanting to take a lunch that I pack, and he just is downing glasses of raw milk and maybe probably more than a half a gallon a day. So, but I rest assured that, okay, at least he's getting his deep nutrition. And things like pate, my daughter loves. The boys, I sneak it more into the meals for them. And butter, I eat butter plain every day. I love it. So
I'd just like to add a couple of things. Don't forget salami.
Yes.
You can get an artisan salami, and now they package it in nitrogen, so it's all sliced and everything. We also get prosciutto ham, already sliced, and that's just instant. And that's what people did in the past. Our ancestors weren't cooking everything either. They were buying things like salami and cheese and so forth. Also, when you make soup, now I probably make a big pot of soup about every 2 weeks. And then I freeze serving sizes. So soup is wonderful, but it's quite a bit of work. So if you're making soup, make a lot of it at once. And things like chili, curry, that can all be frozen. It's instant meals.
Mm. Can I add just a note too?
Sure.
I'm not a meal planner either, never have been. I've tried, I failed. But keeping it simple, like we've already all mentioned, but having the prep work done ahead of time. So when I come home at the end of a long, tiring day and I still have to make dinner's not difficult because I always have the prep work done. So in 15 minutes, I can have actually a really good, delicious, and nourishing meal ready.
Well, I could add one more little thing. Can I? Well, just in feeding the kids at school, that is a much bigger operation. So somebody told me, I don't know whether it was Chuck or somebody said, freedom is in the systems. So really, if you can get your systems in place, whether it's roasting 2 chickens on a Sunday that you know you're going to turn into a bone broth, or I make 2 loaves of sourdough every Sunday so I know we're set up for the week, making your ferments once every 2 weeks, or so if you can start to set the systems, it really does provide a lot of freedom.
Now I want to add something.
But I just want to say something about bread.
Sally wants to add something.
Don't feel obligated to make bread.
No.
Because I never made bread, except when I was practicing for the cookbook. But it just seemed overwhelming to make bread. But I could buy a good bread. So don't have to do it all. No. That's what I'm trying to say.
Do what you love, yeah.
There's so many options, and at farmers markets too. I don't know about where you live, but if you connect with your local chapter leader, they'll help you find sources of sauerkraut and bread and good eggs. So you don't have to get the eggs from this farmer and then the meat from this other farmer. Sometimes it can all be in one place. And I was also thinking the slow cooker can be your friend too, right?
Yes.
It took me a while to figure that out, but oh my gosh, toss some meat in there, some tomato sauce, some onions or whatever. I don't do the mirepoix thing, whatever she was talking about. But just toss it in there, and at the end of the day you come home and it smells like dinner's ready, and it is basically, right? So make the slow cooker your friend. Now, Christine, how old are your kids?
I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old.
So talk to us, I'm pivoting a little bit here, about how you involve them in the cooking process, because I know that makes them feel more invested in it, right? And the end product.
So all of my kids have been involved in the cooking process since they were about a year old, maybe even younger. And it's super easy to do this. From having one of those little stool towers that's up at the countertop so that they can see everything that you're doing, even if they're not touching anything at that moment, just seeing it, to oftentimes I would give them like a tiny little ball of dough, and then they would just roll it and play with it and crumble it up into a million pieces. And having good knives for kids. There's in Waldorf and Montessori, there are knives for kids. So if you go to any Waldorf or Montessori website, you can find knives that kids can use and they can help you chop. And I would do the same thing. I would cut off a bigger chunk for them and just give it to them and let them chop. Again, in any size or shape they wanted. Peeling things, mixing things. Also, taking your kids to the grocery store and letting them choose certain fruits or vegetables or meats that they're interested in. All of this involves them in the process. And not only that, but this is also considered an exposure to these foods. And the more we expose our kids to certain foods, the more willing they will be and receptive they will be to accept these foods on a daily basis. So, and also talking about it too. So it might sound a little redundant, but as you are in the kitchen with your kids, tell them what you're doing. Tell them where the food came from. Explain what it does for their body, why it's good for them. And then do it again at the dinner table and just give thanks to the farmers, give thanks to people that helped you make the food if some of it came purchased. All of that is involving your kids in the meal prepping process.
Maureen, you mentioned this earlier. How do you get your kids involved, or how did you?
Well, with 9 children, it was important to me, the food value, the importance of nutrient-dense diet, and the absence of the yuck I instilled in all of the children from the time they could hear me and understand the importance of eating a good nutrient-dense diet. So we had a farm, a homestead, before homesteading was a thing, and not everybody can do that, but a lot of people have chickens in the backyard. Our children were involved in every facet of food production and then bringing it into the house. And I had them, just like you, Christine, I had them up at the counter, even if it was just using a butter knife to chop vegetables. Or I'm making bread and I'm teaching them and talking to them about all of the steps. And they absolutely love getting that little hunk of dough out of the oven. And, Mommy, look, I made this. Or showing it to Daddy when he comes home. It gets them really excited about being part of it. And then as they grew older, and I'm not talking even teenagers, but I would assign different children to different days for different meals. As they got older, they could handle dinner. When they were younger, maybe it was breakfast and it was scrambled eggs and porridge, and that's fine. One of our children at 8 years old made dinner for the first time, and Sally, you'll be impressed. It was coq au vin. With everything, and I have pictures of him just beaming, 8 years old, and he started it the day before, of course. He was so proud of himself. He now just loves to cook. He's just about 21 years old, and he loves to cook. And 2 of our daughters now have home businesses selling sourdough bread. So they love it. They're invested in it. And
okay, what's kokoma?
Coq au vin.
Coq au vin. Coq au vin. Sorry, I didn't understand. I was like, kokoma. Sounds like something from a coconut country. I don't know. I just was confused. Okay, coq au vin, but go ahead, explain.
Coq au vin is a chicken that is marinated in red wine and herbs and spices, and then it's roasted, and it's obviously very French. I love everything French, I love Sally's book about raising the kids in France. But that is another food that it's simple. It sounds exotic, but it's actually simple. And you can teach your kids step by step how to do these things. They just take great pride. They take ownership in it. When you are not too uptight to control every little thing.
Yeah, because some of the things you were describing, I was like, okay, that sounds messy. So you have to let go of the clean kitchen for the more ultimate, beautiful goal that your children will love cooking. And did you know there's a Nourishing Traditions cookbook for children? Our family, my kids are older, we look at it, we use it all the time. We're like, this is awesome because it simplifies everything. Hilary, what did you do to keep your kids involved in the kitchen?
Okay, much like you guys, just I would say getting them involved from as early an age as possible. I mean, I think I even had the bumbo or whatever that thing was with the baby sitting on the counter and flour everywhere and just the kids everywhere. And it is a mess, a beautiful mess. But just, get them cracking eggs, stirring something, involved in the process and the joy of cooking. And whether you're planting a garden or raising chickens or taking them to the farmer's market, if you do take them to the farmer's market, don't talk too long to all the people that you love there, because I think I maybe ruined that experience for my children in that they were ready to leave hours before I left. So keep it fun and engage them and give them responsibility, right? I think in most cultures, everyone is involved to some degree in nourishing the family or the community. So it's important that it doesn't fall on the shoulders of one. So giving kids a chance to participate in that is an amazing opportunity to give them some life skills. I think cooking is a lost life skill that we need to bring back. So it can be a little bit more work sometimes when there's a mess, but I always throw the music on and dance in the kitchen, and especially during cleanup. At school, we're dancing in the kitchen. So, music is a wonderful thing to add to the kitchen, and you want that to be a warm, fun experience. So those are the memories that you're creating. So I always say I don't remember really any conversations that we had around the dinner table as a family, but I always remember that we had dinner around the dinner table as a family. So just keep everybody involved and keep the kitchen a place where you gather.
Coming up, each guest explains how they have handled picky eaters in their own home.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Paleo Valley. You can get all of the healing properties of apple cider vinegar into the diet without the fuss or the burn. Paleo Valley has an apple cider vinegar complex that includes apple cider vinegar with spices like turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, and lemon for added digestive benefits. Apple cider vinegar is known to support digestion, breaking down proteins for better absorption, and it improves the blood sugar response, helping to fight cravings. Plus, apple cider vinegar has been shown to decrease blood pressure, reduce the risk of heart disease, and it may be helpful for pre-diabetics and T2 diabetics. Apple cider vinegar supplementation also can be helpful with muscle cramps and satiety. So the question is, why not take it? Head over to paleovalley.com/wise to receive 15% off your first order. Again, that's paleovalley.com to check out their apple cider vinegar complex and more products. And use the code WISE to get 15% off your order, or click directly from paleovalley.com/wise. And Optimal Carnivore. They have a new product called Brain Nourish. They have combined grass-fed beef brain and lion's mane mushrooms in a groundbreaking formula. It is the ultimate whole food nootropic to build a better brain. These two ancestral superfoods have been used for centuries to improve brain function and overall mental well-being. And now they're available for the first time in convenient capsules. Studies have shown that both of these ingredients are remarkable at improving cognition and brain health. Also, the good news is that at Optimal Carnivore, they plant one tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 to get 10% off all products that you order. Check out Brain Nourish and their other amazing products like the grass-fed organ complex, the grass-fed liver, and their bone and joint restore. Again, that's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code Weston10 to get 10% off all products. This is Hoda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Now, here's a question that I want each of the panelists to answer, because they each got asked this question so many times. It's, how do you handle a picky eater in a family? What if your kids or your husband is just not into it? Sally, you take this one first.
Well, I think the first thing is, if something they really don't like, don't fix it, okay? I put up with pickiness when it came to eggs. They could have their eggs any way they wanted. And because I was picky about my eggs, I didn't want any white that wasn't congealed. So I did their eggs exactly the way they wanted them. And we're allowed to be picky about eggs. But otherwise, I just tried to make things that tasted delicious. By the way, I think one thing we've left out here is meatloaf. The meatloaf mix makes a meatloaf, makes meatballs, make individual patties, and the leftover meatloaf they loved because I fried it in butter and put cheese on top of the slices. So,
that sounds so good. Yeah. Okay, the show's over. Let's all go have some meatloaf. Anything else?
I just want to talk about the cooking process. I have 4 kids. The first 3 were, I could not get them interested in doing anything, not even rolling cookie dough or anything. So the way I got them involved in the cooking was made them do dishes. Okay, if they're not going to cook, they can do dishes. My youngest was very interested from the beginning, and he's a chef now. So I think they either have the interest or they don't, and I wouldn't force it if they're not interested. Yeah.
All right, Hilary, what about you? What do you do when a kid's not into it or your spouse is like, mm-mm?
Yeah, okay, well, I was going to say from the perspective of now I'm feeding a lot of children at school, and there are some picky eaters. And the first day that I entered the school about, I don't know how many years ago, 2016, the head of the school said to all of us parents, he said, your children need mentors other than you. And I thought, wow, that's so awesome. Such relief that it doesn't have to fall all on me. And it is so important because so many parents have come up to me at school and said, my children will eat what you feed them at school, but they won't eat anything that I feed them at home. So sometimes it takes other people. It can be very frustrating, the relationship with the mother and the child, the father and the child, and there's a lot going on in the house. They know how to pull your strings and pull a tantrum or whatever it is. But if you can surround yourself with other people too that are making good choices and modeling that behavior. I've developed relationships with these picky eaters. There's one little boy who really didn't eat anything, and he was so cute and polite and just said, no, thank you, I'm all set, I'm okay, and we'll go through the lunch line and wouldn't want anything. And one day I said, have you ever tried a blackberry? And he looked at me like, no, never tried one. And he tried it. And we developed a relationship just over that one blackberry. He took a bite of that and his whole face lit up. And it was like an explosion of joy in his mouth. And now that was last spring, and when blackberries, this fall, Chuck brought a whole case of blackberries. And I said to the head of school, can you give this to this child? I gave him his own little box. And I said, but tell him this is really special. And now he has to make sure to try something else new in the line. And so now we have this relationship where he trusts me and he tries new things. And so for the home, that doesn't necessarily apply, but try to get, the grandparents involved or the aunts and uncles or friends that can also help engage in a relationship around food, a healthy relationship, and inspire them to try new things, because I think sometimes it is very hard as the parent.
Yeah, and what's coming to my mind, a phrase you've heard me say a bunch, is more is caught than taught. In other words, instead of trying to tell them, eat that, you eat that. Or you tell them, oh my gosh, I'm nervous about eating this. I've never made it before. Let's see, and have fun with it. But they're going to be watching you and emulating what you're doing. So keep that in mind. Do you have any advice for handling the picky eater, Christine?
That could be an entire, talk on its own. But so going off of what Hilary said, I think that there is definitely something to be said about positive peer pressure. And positive peer pressure can happen within your own home unit with siblings. And it can go both ways. It can go with a younger child eating a food that the older children are maybe squeamish or skeptical of. And they're just staring there gaping at the younger child, watching them devour it and curious. And it can also go with an older child eating a food that the younger child is not really into and hesitant. And it could also go with us. So we can also, like Hilary and Hilda said, we can be the positive role models for our kids and try the foods that maybe we're a little bit hesitant about and show our kids how they're okay. And then the other thing I want to also emphasize is exposure. Exposure. There is research out there that shows that kids need anywhere between 15 and 20 exposures to a food before they even begin to accept it. And parents will stop stop offering a food between 3 and 5 times. So there's a disconnect there. We're only offering a food maybe 3, 4, or 5 times, and then we're saying, oh, they don't like it. They're never going to eat it again. And we give up. When in reality, we need to keep making it over and over and over again, and in different ways. We need to present these foods in different ways for our kids to eat them. Quick story. I have one child who never liked mushrooms, and I love mushrooms. They're one of my favorite foods. And he is now 9, and for 8 years of his life, he has never eaten mushrooms. And I've never pushed it, like Sally said. Each of my kids has a food that they don't like, and if they don't like it, I don't push it. But I continue serving it, and I'm okay if they pick it out of their food and put it on a separate plate. It's fine. This past year, he has started eating mushrooms and has said they're the most delicious thing he's ever tried, and he's like, wow, Mom, why didn't you feed this to me sooner?
I had a child who picked the little pieces of onion out of the spaghetti sauce. So.
Oh, my goodness.
One thing, too, is to say, you don't like this yet. If they say, I don't like this, so because then you encourage that sometimes it takes a little longer, yeah.
Yeah, you're still learning to love new foods. It's okay. Eating is a skill. That's something else that we forget about. Learning how to eat is a skill. It's a learned skill.
And the two things that are very important to me, one is that it's training. And parents train your children for better or for worse, whether or not you realize it. I never allowed my children to be picky eaters. I brought them up from the time they were infants to try everything and learn to like things. And I hated beets until about 10 years ago. But I just kept on trying them until now I love them. But children coming into our home, I often had problems with, and so I learned how to train those children also we feed people all the time. I didn't allow the picky eaters in my house coming as visitors into my house to be picky either, but I also wasn't a Nazi mama. What I do is when there is a food that I feel is very important and that I want to include in our diet regularly for the benefit of everyone, the first thing is I dangle a carrot. I don't have dessert. I don't make dessert usually more than once a week, but when I'm trying to introduce something to especially outsiders, but to my own children as well when they were young, and I know that it's something that they might turn their nose up, I have something delicious as a dessert that I know they're all going to want, and I'm very intentional about this. And then on the plate, I give them just a bite of something, and I say, all that you have to do is try this. It's not a full portion, it's just a little bit, and everything else on the plate has tremendous value. And then if they've just eaten that one thing, and they're going to eat everything else too, but if they've just tried that one thing, then I allow them that carrot. I allow them that cheesecake or that cookie or something that is also clean and good for them. But I think it's important to train them utilizing rewards. We talk about that a lot in other areas too. There's a reward. All you have to do is try this. And with my own children, that has worked beautifully with children coming into my home regularly. It has worked also. One boy that used to come frequently, his mother would say, he's a really picky eater. He's not going to eat anything. Well, I did this kind of thing, and I encouraged him, and he always told his mom, Miss Maureen is the best cook. I was cooking simple foods, but they were nutritious foods, and he loved them because from the very start, he could have a little something as a treat if he just tried it, and he learned to love it. Another mom brought me hot dogs, just junky hot dogs, and she said, Garrett's not going to eat this. He's not going to eat your food anyway, so just here, hot dogs. Just keep them in the fridge. Well, I kept them in the freezer, and I never took them out until I threw them in the trash.
I can just say, sorry, you want to go? Okay.
Wait, name out. No, I'm just
okay.
All right, you go.
Well, sometimes when the kids are going through the line at school and they are picky and looking at a shepherd's pie or a meatloaf and it's just too overwhelming for them, I will put the tiniest little piece on their plate and just say, just one bite to be polite. Just try. So just encouraging even a dollop of dressing that they dip their finger in. I just say, just try it right here, right now. We'll see if you like it. And so often they are so pleasantly surprised that they like it. And the next thing you know, they've gotten more. Then they're coming back for seconds. So they have this conceived notion that they're not going to like something perhaps. And if you, again, show up and just encourage them to just try one little bite, and I'm high fives.
Adults are worse than children in this.
And so normalizing this foods and stuff from early ages is so important. Sometimes we're the most squeamish about things like chicken feet or organ meats, and when you're just plopping them in your broth like it's, your daily routine, then that's what becomes normal. So when you're all sitting down together and you're all eating a meal together, or at school when the whole community is sitting down together and these are the options we have and everyone's modeling this behavior, then it becomes normalized, which is what we need to do.
And I know your co-host, Corey Dunn from Modern Ancestral Mamas, told me one time that she tries to make sure that whatever meal she puts on the table, there's at least one thing that picky kid will eat. So she's like, okay, it's okay. Everything's here. I don't know how she manages if it's one bite to be polite or not, but everything's here, and she knows that kid is mostly just going to have sourdough bread and milk, but there's at least one thing so that kid isn't excluded or made to feel bad. You don't want the table to become a war zone or a battleground. Christine, you wanted to add something.
Okay, so I'm going to add two more things. The first is there is this concept called the division of responsibility, and it was developed by Ellen Sater. And basically the concept is that we as the parents, as the caregivers, are in charge of what our kids eat, when our kids eat, and where our kids eat. So we're in charge of the shopping, the preparing of the food, setting consistent meal times, and where we're going to sit down and eat. And our kids are in charge of how much they eat and if they eat. And this is something really hard as parents for us to let go of, but we actually physically have no control over our kids eating. We cannot force them to eat. So they have full control over that, and a lot of times eating turns into a control battle. So when we just release control and say, okay, it's my child's responsibility to eat what's in front of them, however much they want, and even if they want to eat it, and sort of give them that freedom and that trust, then, like you said, the dinner table doesn't turn into a battleground. And then one last point, which is just for anyone who is struggling with severe picky eating. This would be anyone who has kids where this is a daily battle for you. Every day, this is a problem. It could be that there are deeper issues that need to be resolved. So there could be gut issues going on. There could be mineral imbalances. There could be nutrient deficiencies. And when it's something like that, then it's totally worth getting testing done and looking at it further.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you next. Like, what if it's not a question of they're just like, I don't like that, but they have some kind of allergy or sensitivity or other deeper issue going on? How do you troubleshoot that?
Pretty much what I just said. So yeah, work with a practitioner who can do some hair mineral HTMA testing, some maybe GI map testing, things like that to go deeper. And then depending on the ages of your kids, if they're younger and there are some sort of food sensitivities or you have to make meal adaptations, I think the younger the child is, the easier it is to make that adaptation for the whole family. So if one child needs to go on GAPS, the whole family can go on GAPS. It's easier to do that for everyone, depending on the ages of the kids.
We've done that too.
GAPS is the Gut and Psychology Syndrome book that Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride wrote that's all about healing the gut. And it's kind of an elimination diet to help heal and seal the gut so that that child with sensitivities or that adult with sensitivities can recover and then eat whatever they like. Were you going to add something?
Well, I've done exactly that several times when we've had to go really deep with my husband and with a couple of kids after some Lyme disease issues in particular. So I make the same food for everyone, but I can set some aside in one pot and then add more to the rest of it. So that those who have sensitivities to something that I might want in that dish, they can still have the dish and it's going to be essentially the same, and then maybe it's tomatoes that I add or something like that. So everyone is eating the same. It's easier on us. We don't have to make a separate meal and be overwhelmed. And it's easier on the family because everyone is enjoying the same food.
All right, so let's talk a little backstory, kind of origin story. What motivated you, Hilary, initially to roll up your sleeves and get cooking in the kitchen, to build that Wise Traditions home?
So my $1 million question has always been, how do we wake people up before the wake-up call, before that frying pan to the head, the cancer diagnosis, the sick baby, the IBS, whatever it is. And I have come to realize that I think it is human nature to wait for the wake-up call. So my wake-up call came not when I had stress fractures in both of my femur bones and tibias as a young athlete, or when I had terrible skin, or when I had infertility and miscarriages. It came when my fourth baby had severe eczema head to toe. And that was when I just reached this limit where I was exhausted and depleted and nothing was working. No answers were there were no solutions that were given to me until I met my chapter leader who said, you got to put this kid on raw milk. And I put him on raw milk and cod liver oil, and that completely healed him in a matter of a few months. And that was when my eyes were opened, and I thought, oh my gosh, real food just healed my child, when everybody else said otherwise, that he would probably struggle with asthma, eczema, and allergies, and this just could be his lot in life, and those usually run hand in hand. He might outgrow it, but he might not. And so I really couldn't believe it, because I was somebody that was fat-free for 10 years of my life and was drinking my skim milk and all this stuff and thought I had all the answers. I wanted to major in nutrition in college, and so yeah, it was really that frying pan to the head that I had this baby that was in so much pain, and I didn't know what to do. So thankfully, I stumbled upon the foundation.
So, Sally, what motivated you initially?
Okay, so I actually grew up in a very interesting family. My parents traveled a lot. They were Francophiles. Anything having to do with France, they loved. And my mother was a wonderful cook. She really was a good cook. And my dad, just when he sat down to a good meal, he was so happy. So he loved his food. So that's the family I grew up in. However, I never ate liver. We didn't have raw milk. We did have lots of butter. Then I went to school in France. And if you want to taste horrible food, it's French institutional food. Oh. And I was starving. And so one day I walked down to the local cafe, and they had something, it said terrine. Well, that sounds kind of interesting. So I ordered this terrine. I thought it might be soup or something. It was a slice of cold, fatty meatloaf, and it had liver in it. Okay. And when I took that bite of terrine, it was like I'd finally found what I needed. And so I went to that cafe almost every day, and I ate terrine, and then I ordered pâté, and I just gorged myself with liver. And ever since, I've always made pâté. And so that was one wake-up call. And I'm sure that's why my first child was so healthy, because I really didn't know what I was doing. And then I read Dr. Price's book. I read it in 1974, and that was also just a real wake-up. I realized now that when I read it that we had been more or less eating the right way, and that I also want to say I love to cook. I always loved to cook. And my mother didn't want my help in the kitchen, but we had Julia Child's cookbook, and I just did the recipes. So I had already been cooking in butter and eat lots of eggs, lots of cream, and making my pâté, and I realized that was the way to go. So I just kept on doing that.
Oh, beautiful. Now I want to ask each of you, when did you have the aha moment that diet and nutrition really mattered? Let's start with you, Maureen.
I grew up in a household that lived on Hamburger Helper and turkey burgers in the microwave. I really am still kind of appalled that on one trip with my dad, he talked about how wonderful a cook my mother was. I bit my tongue. But my mother was always obese, and she had a multitude of health issues, really serious health issues. Eventually, at about 12 years old, my mother went on a low-fat diet. She lost 150 pounds, and she lost many of her health diagnoses. She was on a low-fat diet, but she also threw out all of the processed foods. And so we were not eating the best foods, but we were eating far better foods than we had been prior. And so just the fact that her health was so dramatically changed by this change in diet, and it wasn't what it needed to be. And she later learned, actually my parents heard Sally speak in Wisconsin 20 some years ago, and my mother was so proud of herself because I eat 2 eggs every morning, and she did. But she was fat phobic, and she died of dementia and had a multitude of issues primarily with her skeletal system. At any rate, that stuck out in my head, and I've never forgotten that. And so as I was a young mom and wife, I always knew that it was important to cook from scratch. I was using better, what was it? I can't believe it's not butter initially, because it was supposed to be good for us. And then I thought, just intuitively, this can't be good for us. And so I switched to natural foods. And eventually, one of my little old order Mennonite farmer friends had been telling me for probably a year, you need to get this cookbook. It's called Nourishing Traditions. You really need to have this. And I kept saying, I don't need another cookbook. I don't need another cookbook. Then I bought it and I met Sally, and that totally changed everything. And in addition to that, I also had one son like Hilary who was born with severe gut issues, and I didn't know. We were eating soy. We were milking a cow too and eating eggs, but soy. And I had to figure out how to help him correct his gut. And this was before GAPS. This was before the Weston A. Price Foundation. This was before the internet. But the thought of my mother's health pilgrimage, which was incomplete, inspired me to really figure it out and help my son, which I did. So,
Christine, tell us a little bit about your story.
So I actually don't have a one aha moment. I have a lot of like little smaller moments that I think sort of catapulted me onto this path. One of the ones that I can think of is at some point in my 20s, I don't even remember why, but I read a book called The Unhealthy Truth by Robin O'Brien. And it was all about ingredient labels and ingredients in food. And it sort of just like hit me in the head and shocked me that these companies were putting these foods, these chemicals, food-like substances, into our food, and I couldn't believe it. And so as a 20-something-year-old, I was just like, oh my gosh, so I need to really pay attention to what's going on in the grocery store. Around a little bit maybe before that, unfortunately, my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he lived with it for 2 years. And I saw my mom try to use food as a way to heal him. And this was something new. The doctors never said anything about food. She was juicing. She was trying to feed him real foods. So I saw that. And then, again, sometime in my 20s, I don't know why she waited so long to give me this book, but she gave me this book called Nourishing Traditions and said, hey, you might like this. And I read it from cover to cover and was like, what were you doing hiding this in your, in your book closet for so long? So it was all of those. And then I would say that like the final straw was kind of on a whim. We decided we were going to go to the 2017 conference in Minnesota. And I left that conference with a fire under my tail and was just like, we are starting a chapter. We have to get this information out. I cannot believe that more people don't know about this. And that was it for me. And I never looked back.
Wow. Can you tell us, Hilary, how have you seen nutrition make a difference? And I know your story with your son you told earlier, and I know it made a difference for your fertility and all the other things too, but have you seen it out and about, like applying some of these principles of including nutrient-dense foods on the table? Have you seen a difference, for example, in the kids that you work with at the school?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with my own kids, we don't really get sick. We might get a common cold or a sore throat here and there. But, every year, actually, I would be like, gosh, like, I would knock on wood, like, we don't go to the doctor. And then the next year, I'm like, and we're still not going to the doctor, knock on wood. And now, they're all almost like grown up and out of the house. And so it really is that the nutrient-dense foods, and actually our pediatrician had said to us, like, if you hadn't been feeding these kids this way, I mean, I had 5 kids under 4. I had triplets that were preemies. I had the eczema baby. We had speech delays in 3 of our boys, 1 with tics, a daughter with epilepsy. So we had a lot of issues. And so they miraculously, knock on wood, I will do that again, even though it's not wood, whatever. I kind of was like surprising myself every year, like, wow, this really works, right? And with the kids at school, we really focus on savory over sweet. We don't feed dessert. And the first year that we started, we did a little mini documentary, like a little 12-minute video that's on our site. And the 6th grade boy said, unprompted, he said, I used to feel like this, up and down, all day long. And now I feel like this. And I just thought, well, that is our 30-second commercial right there. Like that, I couldn't believe it. I mean, he articulated that, I think most people don't know what it feels like to feel good. And these kids are just bouncing up and down all day long. And that's just normal for them. So I know that, when you feed these nutrient-dense foods and you have them, the satiety, you hit that satiety level, that they're steady and even and good to go. And nobody is like moping around depressed. And they're all, they're very joyful kids that I see go through the line. And so it's such a gift to be able to feed them this way and nourish them every day, and the smiles and the gratitude, and know that you're making a difference. And actually we had one child who was in 1st grade, and his dad said he was given an autism diagnosis and that he eats 1 grain of rice at a time. And he's new this year, and he is making the most beautiful plates. He's asking for more sauerkraut every day. He actually told his dad that his dad videotaped this, that he was going to steal his dad's car and drive to Manzanita and break into the kitchen and steal all the kraut. So it's just such a joy to see. It just works. I can say 100% with 100% confidence that it works. It really, truly works. It really lights these kids up from the inside, and they can't necessarily always express it, but you see it in their vitality and their smiles and their joy that comes around the lunch line.
So Sally, you were in France, you're eating the terrine, you're eating the pâté, you're feeling the benefits of this deep nutrition in your own body. What did you start to see as you moved from that to becoming the author of Nourishing Traditions and the head of all this?
Well, I certainly saw an improvement in my own health, and my health problem was hypoglycemia, and I was a sugarholic, like so many people. And I figured out that if I ate fat with every meal, that I avoided the sugar, that I wasn't hypoglycemic anymore. So that's really the beginning of my journey. I feel that I didn't choose any of this, that I was pushed into it, and I had no choice. I got the idea to write Nourishing Traditions, and it kind of grabbed hold of me. I couldn't get it out of my head. It was like an obsession. And then one day I said, well, it's like you said, there's thousands of cookbooks out there. Nobody needs another cookbook. So I decided to stop writing it. And one day I was just sitting there. I used to have time to play the piano. I don't have time anymore. And I was just sitting there on the piano stool, kind of in a reverie. And I actually heard a voice. I mean, it wasn't like in my head. It was a real voice. And the voice said, it is very important for you to write the cookbook. That's all. That's called a calling, okay? And so I went back to it, and one thing led to another, and here you are.
Thank you for listening to that voice. I'm sure many of you are as moved as I am that she took this on, and she listened, and she's had this tremendous impact. I told her the other day, oh my gosh, Sally, you've changed my life. She's like, oh, no, I didn't, I'm like, yes, you did. And I appreciate that humility. I also appreciate your heart for young moms and for babies. You've told me so many times that you really want to see the next generation thrive. What are some good first foods for baby?
Yes, and I've written quite a bit about this. There's an article on our website called Bringing Up Baby, so that's a good one to read. I'm appalled at the advice given to moms for their babies. One of the worst books out there is Baby-Led Weaning. Is just a horrible book. Obviously, we want all the mothers to breastfeed, and if they can't breastfeed, the second best thing is formula made with raw milk. Okay, and that formula has been fed to at least 20,000 babies, and the feedback we get is universally positive. Only when you have a baby who really, really is very sick and compromised do they have problems with the formula. Usually they're crying and they're not gaining weight on breast milk. We switch to the formula and it's just like out of the dock. They just thrive. So that's how you start. I am not a proponent of exclusive breastfeeding after 6 months. No traditional culture does this, by the way. By 6 months, they need iron. The babies do absorb all the iron in raw milk, but it's not enough by 6 months. And they become anemic. And anemia is very serious. It can cause mental retardation, so you don't want anemic children. And of course, then the mom goes to buy baby food. And what do they find out there? It's just fruit. It's just like naked sugar, and it's in plastic or aluminum. It's just horrible what's happened on baby food. And basically that fruit is, the leftover, the scrapings and the stuff that wasn't pretty enough to sell. That's what's going into the baby food. So the first two foods for babies are egg yolks and pureed liver. And if you go to my blog and go to the articles on Bringing Up Baby, there's a really cute video of my grandson getting liver for the first time. And it's really cute. So the egg yolk, it's even easier than I describe in Nourishing Traditions. Somebody gave me this idea. You just make a fried egg with a runny yolk and feed the baby from the yolk, okay? With a little salt. Oh, that's the other horrible thing they're saying to moms. Don't give salt to your baby. Your baby's not going to be very intelligent if you don't give him salt. So you can start by just having the baby lick it off your finger, And then finally you give it with a little spoon. And then you make the pureed liver. It needs to be quite watery. I think poultry liver is the best because it's a mild flavor and it has the best balance of fat-soluble vitamins. Be sure to add salt. You can mix it with some butter or a broth. And the baby's going to, push it out at first. That does not mean that baby's not ready for solid food. It means that baby's learning how to eat. Okay? And as he pushes it out, you take the spoon and just put it back in, and pretty soon he'll be a real trooper. So those are the first foods. They are very high in fat. They're high in cholesterol, which baby needs. They've got the fat-soluble activators, and baby's going to be happy. Okay. Then you can make the transition to pureed meats. By the way, a really good one is gizzard. It's inexpensive, and it purees beautifully, and it's very nutritious. And then don't worry about vegetables. I had moms say, I don't know what to do. I'm just tearing my hair out. My baby won't eat vegetables. So it's okay. They don't need vegetables at this stage of life. But when you do give them vegetables or pureed fruits, you put cream or butter. You don't just want to give naked carbs. And always a little salt. I'll tell you something that they will love is mashed bananas with cream and a pinch of salt. Oh, my goodness.
I would love that too. Okay, so...
But it's the egg yolk and the liver is the first two foods.
Thank you, Sally. All right, so this next one is rapid fire lightning round question. Favorite appliance or a secret tool of the trade? Maureen, you go first.
Immersion blender. KitchenAid immersion blender. It makes life so simple.
Vitamix and sharp knives.
I would say sharp knives and a RoboCoupe if you're cooking for a lot of people.
Oh, okay. I would say the food processor, slow cooker, and the immersion blender.
Awesome. All right. You can take a little more time on this one. Maureen, I don't know about the audience here, but I just hold you all in such high regard, and it seems like you do it all so well. Please tell us a story when you messed up, when something didn't turn out right and your whole family hated it, or whatever it is. Just tell us one story so we can all feel better. Go.
When I was first getting rolling and I had nourishing traditions, we had the homestead, so we were growing our own vegetables, eggs, meats, and all of that, milk, everything. And of course, I would stick stuff in the freezer to preserve it. Well, it was clean out the freezer time, and I was going to make it delicious and super nutritious. Not only did my family not eat it, it was so bad. I was still learning, Sally. I learned to cook from your cookbook, but it was so bad, even though it was full of nutrition. Don't use green beans that are way too big and should have been picked a month before, because not only would the kids not eat it, but neither did the chickens or the pigs.
Oh, wow. I feel really good about myself right now. But I'm not trying to feed chickens and pigs. All right, you go. Christine.
Okay, so once I started on this Wise Traditions path, I decided I was going to make my first Thanksgiving, all from scratch, kind of like Bill Schindler. My in-laws were coming over. It was Thanksgiving with them that year, and I had this turkey. I had bought it from my farmer in Chicago. It was beautiful. It was big, massive turkey. And I knew I had to salt the turkey for a dry brine, but I didn't really know how much. And so I sort of was just like, well, salt is good. So we'll just add salt. Oh, more salt is better. And a lot of salt is really good. So I was just salting this turkey and cooked it. It turned out so gorgeous, like perfectly golden brown skin. You just wanted to eat it. And then served it, and not everyone wanted to eat it. And a lot of it was left over, and I had to figure out what to do with an oversalted turkey. And that was my Thanksgiving disaster.
Oh, gosh. Hilary.
Okay, I can remember when the triplets were little, I decided I was going to they were still in high chairs. I guess they were probably like 15 months old maybe, and maybe younger, I guess. I don't know. But I was going to make this nice salmon dinner, and I bought this really nice piece of salmon with rice and broccoli or some sort of vegetable, and I had them all lined up, and I had spent all this time making this and served it all up to them, and they, for some reason, I don't know why, I would have thought maybe I didn't cook it very well, but they just started throwing it off the high chairs, and they were feeding off of one another, and the more they threw, the happier they got, and they were laughing, and I was in tears. I'm like, come on, you guys, you should like this. And then, of course, if you don't have a dog before you have kids, I highly recommend getting a dog. I didn't have a dog, so I'm on the ground picking up, I don't know how much time I spent on the floor picking up food, and we had the, it's not the 30-second rule, it was like the 5-minute rule in my house. It was just like constant food on the floor. So I was in tears and just exhausted and so sad that they didn't like it. I can laugh at it now, but in the moment I was like so frustrated with my children. But anyway, yeah. It hasn't all been success. Yeah.
Not all smooth sailing. So when I was working on Nourishing Traditions, I thought, I need some dishes from Africa in this book. So there was this really nice young man who was kind of right off the boat from Africa working at Whole Foods. And I invited him to come cook dinner for the family. And as he came with his ingredients and everything, he was so happy to do this dinner. And one of the things was fufu, which is, it's taro root. Yeah. It's quite fibrous. And then he made some meal that the meat was very chewy. It had a lot of knuckles and stuff in it. And I said, I'm not sure the children will be able to eat this. Oh, he says it's delicious. He puts this great big knuckle in his mouth and chews it down, swallows it. So anyway, I did warn the children. I said, just, kind of try to eat this. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Anyway, the dog was a big favorite that night. Yeah, anyway.
But wait, Sally, did this end up in the cookbook or no?
No, I thought, we'll just do that continent another time.
Okay. Well, we're going to start to wrap up, but I do want to ask you, Hilary, how do you handle the feelings of loneliness that can come with feeling like it's an uphill battle, either on the home front or community-wise, like I'm the only one trying to feed my family this way? Like, how do you handle that kind of the naysayers and the feelings of loneliness?
Well, I read one time, what makes the great is that they don't listen to the naysayers. So I've always kept that tucked away inside, just trying to hold my head high and do what I know to be right. And it can be a very lonely road, for sure. So I've stopped trying to convince people that this is the right thing to do, and I now just go where water flows. I said, those who are going to find this and want this information, I'm happy to share as much as I know and give you everything I know, but I spent a lot of years like kind of a bull in a china shop trying to make change and change the world and everyone wake up, right? But you can die trying to do that, right? People are ready when they're ready. So again, finding your tribe, finding that one person, and then just nourishing yourself through it all, really, and loving yourself through the process. And if you are happy and joyful, which you will be if you're eating this way, then you just know that it's all gonna, I always say always forward, never straight. Just keep moving forward and know that it's not always going to be a smooth, straight line. But
I love that. Thank you. Sally?
Well, I'd like to give a little praise to my mother in this respect because she really was quite a snob. And I think in this case, when you're doing something differently from everybody else, just be a little bit of a snob.
That's not a bad thing. That's awesome.
You got the knowledge. It's too bad for them.
You'd be happy, Sally. My son just said in college, he's a freshman in college, and he said, Mom, I think I'm a food snob.
Yeah. So. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, now it's time for the last question. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend they do? We'll start with you, Maureen.
Get rid of the sugars and the sweets from your household and processed foods in general, but especially that. And like Sally, I also very much believe in just making your own salad dressings and mayonnaise. Get rid of those awful fats.
Thank you. Christine.
I actually think relationships and connection with your loved ones is one of the most important, especially with your children. So really developing a strong attachment with them and having a good relationship with your significant other, because you're definitely going to need that on this journey.
Absolutely. Hilary.
I woke up yesterday and literally the first thing that popped into my head was radical self-love. It just I don't know, it almost woke me up. And I thought, committing to your own well-being, right? Just making that, just loving yourself as much as you can, because I think we're so hard on ourselves and there's so much information and so much influence on what our thoughts are all day long. And so if you can really love yourself through the process and trust in your body, trust that your body is this miracle and we're part of nature and we're designed to work, and we miraculously, we can build a baby inside of our bodies without, well, some of us can, without telling it what to do, right? We're not like, today you need to build the heart and tomorrow you need to build the eyes, or whatever it is. Your body knows what to do. So support yourself with the foods that nourish you, the sunlight, out in nature as much as possible, and relationships, and just love on yourself. I think that's the best thing we can do for humanity.
And Sally.
Okay, this is actually not answering your question, but it's a story.
You can do whatever you want, Sally.
Okay, so I had a girl and then 3 boys, and I was driving the 3 boys to school. And my oldest boy, who was inveterate tease, he said, Mom, he said, we figured out that you're really weird. And I said, Nick, I'm the only mom you have, so you're just going to have to live with it. And I think it's important to realize that not entirely necessary to be friends with your kids. It's to mold them into high-functioning adults, healthy, high-functioning adults. So I see a lot of parents who don't have the confidence to kind of go against their children, to discipline or to be different from their children or to say no, and you have to say no. So, yes.
No is a complete sentence.
No is a complete sentence. There we go.
Beautiful.
No.
Well, I want to say, yes, you all are so beautiful, so full of wisdom. Let's give them a hand. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
You all can't see this, but they just gave a standing ovation to these beautiful women. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a part. Thank you for listening. And remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun. Our guest today came at us live from the Wise Traditions Home panel at the 2023 Wise Traditions Conference. They included Maureen Diaz, Hilary Boynton, Christine Muldoon, and Sally Fallon Morell. Their websites are godsgoodtable.com for Maureen Diaz, schooloflunch.com for Hilary Boynton, nourishthelittles.com for Christine Muldoon, and nourishingtraditions.com for Sally Fallon Morell. And I'm Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of the podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Creation Stewardess called her review Onward and Forward, saying, after years of trauma and many near-death experiences, including withering away to a mere 50 pounds due to parasites and mold, I never have let go of my dream to travel the world, teaching and learning ancient traditional ways. I have been miraculously healed after years of trying everything. Through it all, your podcast has encouraged me with hope and reminded me that there are other like-minded souls around me. I have now been backpacking through the world for 7 months, visiting villages, learning, teaching, and observing. My dream has come true. All praise to God, and I'm so grateful for all the wisdom I gleaned from you along the way. I continue to listen wherever I go, whether it's with water buffaloes in Bulgaria, baking bread off-grid in France, butchering pigs, shepherding goats. I am constantly reminded of where I used to be and how grateful I am to be where I am. I am committed to being the resistance and stand with you along the way. Creation Stewardess, this is a beautiful testimonial. Thank you so much for leaving these words of encouragement to any potential listeners. And you too can leave us words of encouragement. Let folks know why the show is worth listening to. Go to Apple Podcasts, give us as many stars as you care to, and rate and review the show. And thank you so much for listening, my friends. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.